Hi, welcome to Lesson 13. If you've been following along and you've been going step by step from day one, you'll recognize that everything we're doing has been building up one little item at a time. We learned the names of our strings, we learned how to play on one string, we learned how to fret notes by numbers, we learned how to recognize some notes by name, we played a song, Jingle Bells, by name, and then we related those notes to what they would look like on a staff written in regular music notation. Then we worked on a system to read those notes, worked our way through Hal Leonard for the first strings E and B, all the way up to playing a song called Ode to Joy, using those notes. At the same time, we took a single note, held it, and strummed to make a chord. So then you had a G chord, you'd move your finger to another note for a G7, move it to another for a C, add a couple of fingers to a D7. This is the best, most efficient way to learn overall. You take what you know and you adapt it, you add a tiny bit to it, and you're confidently building up and going up a rung of steps or a staircase, building on one thing that you already learned. You would practice about 5 to 10 minutes a day on any item. Forever, this is how you should practice. As a beginner, you're only going to max out at 5 or 10 minutes, but even as a pro, when you're doing 10 hours a day, you would be breaking it into 10-minute practices. You'd practice for a module, take a little break. Practice, take a little break. You learn best the things that you do first in a practice and the things you do last. Primacy versus recency. The stuff in the middle, your focus wanes and you don't do as well. So the best thing you can do is break your practices or your study or your reading or anything else you're doing into small pieces where there's lots of firsts and lots of lasts. A few hours after you've practiced, come back and do it again. Make sure your brain can retrieve that information. That's what actually cements it and moves it from this very short term to a longer term memory, is that active retrieval. Everything we've learned is actually in our heads, but we say we forget them because we don't know how to retrieve them at will. That said, one other thing we can do sometimes is, rather than incrementally building up the changes, is you can just get in there with a bulldozer and just terraform your mind. This is done sometimes between lessons. You've got a whole week to work on something. Maybe you go off and find a book or find something on the internet that you love, and just because of sheer love, you'll work on it for hours and hours. That will not do the same kind of incremental learning. It won't build up the little changes that are as permanent, but what it will do is really give your brain a shock. That big experience of learning will release hormones that will just really reward it, and it gives you a new background from which to work. This is sort of like the scaffolding method, where you're helped up to learn something that you're not really ready for yet, but because of the aids that you have, you're allowed to step over some steps in it and build up a new structure that you can use. We've been doing that a little bit with our chords, where we jumped out from little chords to larger chords right away. If you're finding that those don't follow sequentially and logically for you, if you're not quite ready for them, then don't do them yet. The little 3-string chords are perfectly sufficient for a beginner, especially if you've been working at this for 2 or 3 months. That's where we're at if you've been taking these lessons once a week or once every 2 weeks. The other aspect of learning something larger or learning more than you're ready for is that you actually have something to compare these items to. If you were asked to describe an apple, for instance, you might not know where to start. You don't know what you're trying to distinguish it from. Are you distinguishing it from a crab apple? So, okay, it's bigger. Are you distinguishing it from a cherry? Well, they're both red, so the apple is greenish. But if I'm giving you an apple and an orange and said, what's the difference? Right away you know what you're looking for. The apple's shiny and reddish. The orange is rougher and orange colored. The apple has a stem. The orange doesn't. The apple has a thin little peel that you can bite through. The orange has a thick rind that you have to pull off. It's by comparison and distinguishing the two that makes them actually memorable. We see the same thing with our chords, our notes, our strings, things like that. You can memorize a string all on its own, or you can compare it to another string and see why it's distinctive. Oh, this string has a note in the 2nd fret, this one has a note in the 3rd. You wouldn't have known that was even a thing that you should know. It wasn't a thing that mattered until you compared the two. With that all said, I want to look at another song here. This is Last Kiss. It's a cover song by Pearl Jam, and it's going to utilize the chords that we've gotten to if you've worked through all the different chord exercises so far. If you haven't yet, if this is too early for you, just put this aside and remember it for later. This song has a distinctive doo-wop sound. It's from 1964 by the Cavaliers. This sound of going from this kind of chord, the G, to its relative minor, that's a term you heard before, the E minor, creates that 50s or 60s sound. When we learned these chords, we learned them in little steps. The first G we had was just this G note, and we strummed 3 to 4 strings. Then we had a G7, then a C that was 3 strings, with you holding this note. From there, we added these 2 fingers to make a D7. We don't have it pictured here, but those 2 fingers moved into A minor, and I moved them down to the E minor. We learned also an E major and an E7. Also the A minor, we found if we moved 1 finger, we could get into a C. So we built this larger C. With the G chord, while we played this G, we found out we had a G here. You could hit all 6 strings while you hold those 2 notes, or add the pointer right there, and you've got your full G chord. So with step-by-step learning, we put all these chords into our repertoire. Now we can put them together. I like to use songs as a vehicle to learn these ideas. It's kind of a funny little catch-22. We learn music so we can play songs generally, but I'm not using songs so that you know that song. It's not necessarily that you would love to play Last Kiss by Pearl Jam, but this song will solidify these chords. It gives these chords a context that you can learn them in. Then you can go away and say, that set of chords is popular in that order. That's called a chord progression, and I want to know that. And it sounds like doo-wop music. That's interesting to know. Ed Sheeran uses the same progression in Perfect, and it has that 60s sound. There's G, E minor, C, D, sus, and D. He does it in an Ed Sheeran style at first, but knowing that this is a doo-wop sound, his next section of the song sounds very much like a 60s swinging tune. So you can't really understand that right now. You don't know the numbering system or why this sounds like doo-wop, but you can walk away thinking, yeah, this G to E minor sounds like that style, and it will be distinguished from other styles. Different chord progressions sound like different songs. So in this one, I want to learn a few more anchor fingers. Here's the G we're using. There's another way to do G you've seen before, but right now I want the ring finger on G like we learned, and build the whole chord. The pointer stays and the middle finger goes onto the 4th string. Now you have E minor. I have another anchor we haven't learned yet. The middle finger is already in position from here to the C chord, so I'm not going to move it. I'll pivot on it, put my ring finger on the 5th string, my pointer on the 2nd, and hit 5 strings. That's a C chord. I'm going to use D7 right now because I like the pivot that we've learned. Although you could use a D chord once we've mastered it. Back to G, remember, I slide the chord and extend it. So G, E minor, pivot on the middle finger, the anchor, pivot on the 1st finger, the anchor, guide yourself into the G. This is a guide finger. It stays on the same string but moves frets. Anchor into E minor, anchor on the pivot, anchor, guide. So that's the entire song. You just keep going through that progression. A specific pattern of chords is called a chord progression. One chord progresses through the next to give us an actual direction. I told you when we worked on the Green Day song just to do 4 strums per bar. If we're just strumming downward for a 4 count, we can indicate them with these little boxes or staples. This is beat 1, 2, 3, and 4, strumming down. In this song you heard I was doing a different pattern. down, down, up, down, up. That pattern takes a little while to work toward. In order to practice toward it, I'd have you do these downs, and then after every down strum is an up strum. You're already picking up, I was strumming with my fingers actually before, so every time I do a down, switch chords after 4. For a beginner, this is a great practice. Don't feel like you're not accomplishing anything if you do this. This sounds awesome. Notice every time my hand goes down though, it has to come back up. So after a while, you may accidentally hit a string on the way up. Oh, that was kind of pretty. Hey, I like that. So now what I'm doing, if I'm strumming with my nails, I'm strumming with my fingernails down, I'll catch my thumbnail on a few strings coming up. One mistake people make when they're trying to learn down and up strums is all 6 strings down, all 6 strings up. And then they find they're getting hung up. You can hit as many on the way down as you like, all 6, but then just catch a few on the way up. I'm going to do it with my pick as well. We have to learn how to hold a pick and how to use a pick properly in a few lessons too. If you've been working on it, you've probably seen some videos on it, but I'll cover that as well very soon. So here are my down strums, nice and loose. Since I have to pick my pick up anyway, I'll let it flick the strings on the way up. If these were 1 beat quarter notes, I'm now doing an and in between the beats now. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are quarter notes, 4 per bar. When I do ups and downs, there's 8 of them, so they're 8th notes. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... You heard I wasn't exactly doing this pattern though. Do that for several days till you feel comfortable with it. And then we can start adapting it a little. Maybe don't do this up. So you go down, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, up, down, down, up, down. Seriously, that's tons of stuff for you at this point. If you can get through these chords and just get from one to the next, that would be great. A single practice that just does G to E minor would be amazing. That you should do that for days, from E minor to C. That would be something you'd work for days. Look at the minimal motion I'm doing. Middle finger on the 4th string, adding these 2 on the diagonal line. If you didn't have chords to compare to, you might not think of C as a diagonal chord, but definitely when I compare it to E minor or G, which seem to be going vertically, that's something I think about. Later on we can talk about you have various diagonal chords. So that's enough. If you get good at 2 of those chords, or another 2, if you can strum through them with down strums, if you can finally get to down and ups, this could be months down the road. Save these lessons and come back to them. Keep spiraling back. When you encounter something very hard, try it out, but go back to day 1. You'll find out you're way better at day 1 stuff. Rotate around day 2, day 4, day 10, go back. You'll get better at the old stuff, which makes you better at the new stuff. Trying new stuff that's way above your head makes you better at the old. And you just keep spiraling and getting better and better. With that said, I want to give you one more step here. If you've gotten down, down, up, down, up, down, up, I want to try one of the hardest moves here. This could take you months to get good at. In personal private lessons, we'd work on it in various ways. We won't get a chance to here. But now I've taken out beat 3. That's one of my downs. This is called syncopation, when you accent these up strums and avoid the downs. Very, very popular. This is probably our most famous strum. It'll apply to song after song, so you might as well learn it. I'll go through the steps again. I had downs, down ups. I missed an up, so it was down, down, up, down, up, down, up. Now I'm going to miss this down. Down, down, up, down, Notice my pick still goes down. Down, it had to come up even though I didn't hit it. Down, up, it has to go down even though I don't hit it. And then the last up, down, up at the end. You'll want to pause here out of satisfaction of getting through. Now I'll start again. That's perfectly fine at first. Work those mechanics, learn the physicality of it, just force yourself to get down, down, up, make sure I pass, up, down, up. But after a while then, you want to keep this going. This is your pendulum. Whether I'm doing downs or ups, down ups, missing some. The pendulum doesn't stop. So here you don't stop because you're not playing, you actually make sure you pass. Here you get back to the beginning. People will often hear this up and pause here. But make sure you allow yourself to pass by. I'll say miss on that. Down, down, up, miss, up, down, up, down, down, up, miss, up, down, up, down, down, up, miss, up, down. So this song has a little bit of a swing to it. That action is right, but you'll hear just a slightly different flow. If you get good at it, take it back to your Green Day song because this is the rhythm they did too. So if you get good at it here, take it back where you were and apply it there. This is why we don't try to learn every single skill applicable to every single song. In group classes, I'll often get people who know a little bit more, always trying to interject. Oh, why don't you tell John this? Tell him that. This is what helped me. And it's just not useful to John yet. He's trying to get one skill. There's no point adding 5 to that. Remember, you're not finished yet. That song last week didn't sound exactly like the Green Day song to you, but you learned the chords. You learned how to strum. Now that you know a pattern, you can go back and apply it to that song. Notice that that's going to happen all the time. Every single concept we learn is going to spiral back to pick up some old information and apply it to the new information, and both will continue to get stronger. You'll just be like a snowball rolling down the hill, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. A little caveat, you'll still feel like a beginner. 20 years later, if you're still learning things, you'll still go, why don't I know everything yet? What you have to do is look back and realize all the millions of things you have learned. So I've got a chance to wrap that up now. Hopefully that'll give you some nice information going forward. We're going to step back again to Hal Leonard really quick here, and we want to keep that in a parallel track as well. But this will give you a little bit of an advancement and maybe a little bit more fun on chords. Talk to you later. Bye.